The evening air in Detroit was thick with the scent of damp asphalt and distant industry, a familiar urban perfume that Father Michael had come to associate with the quiet twilight hours. Inside St. Jude's Catholic Church, the only sounds were the soft creak of old pews and the distant murmur of traffic, a world away from the hushed solitude of the confessional. The familiar scent of old wood, polished over decades by countless hands, and the faint, sweet aroma of beeswax from countless candles created a comforting presence. He had been a priest for over 20 years, his gentle demeanor, kind eyes, and empathetic ear a beacon for the troubled souls of his parish. He had heard tales of infidelity, of petty theft, of profound despair, and of deep, gnawing regret. Each confession was a sacred trust, a burden shared, then, hopefully, absolved through the grace of God. He believed with every fiber of his being in the sanctity of the confessional, the absolute confidentiality that allowed true repentance to flourish, a space where even the darkest sins could be laid bare without fear of earthly judgment. A rustle on the other side of the screen broke his reverie. A shadow shifted, barely discernible through the perforated wood, and then a voice, low and distorted, began to speak. It was not a voice he recognized from his congregation, nor did it carry the familiar cadence of any regular penitent. It was flat, almost devoid of emotion, yet it vibrated with a chilling certainty that sent an immediate shiver down Father Michael's spine, a premonition of something profoundly disturbing. "Bless me, Father, for I have sinned." The voice began, a standard opening, yet even these familiar words felt like a prelude to something far from ordinary, something deeply unsettling. "It has been a long time since my last confession." The pause that followed was pregnant with unspoken darkness. Father Michael waited, his breath held, his senses acutely aware of the unseen presence on the other side. The air in the small booth seemed to grow heavy, charged with an unspoken dread that pressed in on him. Then came the words, delivered with a calm that was more terrifying than any outburst, any scream of anguish. "I've killed someone, and I'm going to kill again." The world outside the confessional, the quiet church, the bustling city beyond its walls, seemed to recede into an indistinct blur. Father Michael's heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the sudden, profound silence. He gripped the worn wooden armrest, his knuckles white against the dark wood. This was not a confession of regret, not a plea for absolution for a past wrong. It was a declaration, a stark, terrifying promise of future violence. "My son," Father Michael managed, his voice a little hoarse, struggling to find the right words, to maintain his composure in the face of such chilling pronouncements. "What are you saying? Are you confessing to murder?" "Yes, Father," the voice replied, still unnervingly steady, devoid of any tremor of fear or remorse. "I am, and I will do it again. Soon, very soon. You must stop," Father Michael urged, his mind racing, trying desperately to grasp the enormity of what he was hearing, to find a way to intervene. "You must turn yourself in. This path leads only to deeper darkness, to eternal damnation, to a life consumed by evil." "It's already done," the voice said, a faint, almost imperceptible sigh following the words, like the last breath of a dying ember. "And the next one will be too. There is no stopping this, Father. Not for me, not for them. It is a necessity." "Who is them?" Father Michael pressed, straining to extract any detail, any clue, anything that might help him identify the anonymous voice, to understand the motive. "Who have you killed? Who are you going to kill?" Silence. A long, agonizing silence stretched between them, broken only by the distant, muffled hum of the city, a stark contrast to the turmoil within the confessional. Father Michael strained his ears, hoping for a cough, a shift, the rustle of clothing, anything that might give him a hint about the person behind the screen. But there was nothing. The stillness was absolute, impenetrable. Then the voice returned, colder now, more distant, as if the speaker had retreated further into the shadows. "That is all, Father. I have made my confession. My soul is unburdened, but you must seek repentance. Father Michael pleaded, his priestly duty to offer spiritual guidance clashing violently with his human instinct to protect, to prevent harm. You must truly regret your actions and turn away from this evil. God's mercy is boundless for those who truly seek it. Regret is a luxury I cannot afford, the voice stated, the words like chips of ice. And then, with a soft, decisive click, the screen on the other side of the confessional slid shut. Father Michael sat frozen, his body rigid, listening intently for footsteps, for any sound of departure. He heard the faint creak of the church door, then the soft whisper of the wind through the stained glass windows, and then silence. He was utterly alone, left with the chilling echo of a nightmare, a confession that felt more like a curse. For the rest of the night, Father Michael wrestled with an unbearable burden, a weight that pressed down on his chest, making it difficult to breathe. The sanctity of the confessional was absolute, a cornerstone of his faith. A priest could not, under any circumstances, reveal what was said within its sacred confines, no matter how heinous the sin, no matter how great the threat. His faith demanded absolute confidentiality, a trust that transcended earthly laws. But his conscience screamed for justice, for intervention, for the protection of innocent lives. An innocent life was at stake, perhaps more than one, and he was bound by a vow that seemed to condemn him to inaction. He paced his small rectory room, the worn floorboards creaking beneath his feet, the words of the anonymous confessor replaying in his mind like a broken record, a tormenting loop. I've killed someone, and I'm going to kill again. He prayed, long and hard, kneeling before his crucifix, seeking guidance, seeking a sign, a path through this moral maze. But the answers remained elusive, obscured by the fog of his agonizing dilemma. Sleep offered no escape, only fragmented images of shadowy figures, whispered threats, and the faces of unknown victims. The weight of the secret pressed down on him, a physical ache in his chest, a spiritual wound that would not heal. The next morning, the news broke like a thunderclap, shattering the fragile peace of the city. The body of a young woman, Sarah Jenkins, a vibrant artist known for her colorful murals that had brought life to the city's revitalized districts, had been found in an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of Corktown. The details were sparse, but the brutality of the crime hinted at a cold, calculated act, a chilling precision that spoke of intent, not passion. Father Michael felt a cold dread spread through him, a sickening certainty. Could this be the first victim? The timing was too close, the nature of the crime too chillingly aligned with the anonymous confession. He saw Sarah's bright, hopeful face on the news, her eyes full of life and creativity, and a wave of nausea washed over him. He knew who had done this, even if he did not know their name. The knowledge was a heavy chain around his soul. The city of Detroit, accustomed to its share of struggles and resilience, felt a new tremor of fear ripple through its very foundations. The murder of Sarah Jenkins, a seemingly random act of violence against a beloved community figure, sent ripples of profound unease through its diverse communities. The police, led by the seasoned and stoic Detective Inspector Thomas Mallory, were tight-lipped, offering little information beyond the basics of the crime scene. Mallory was a man forged in the city's crucible, his face etched with years of witnessing humanity's darker side, his eyes holding the weary wisdom of countless investigations. He had a reputation for dogged determination, an unwavering commitment to justice, and a keen eye for the smallest, most overlooked detail. He knew this kind of crime. It felt personal, yet without a clear motive. Father Michael followed the news obsessively, each report a fresh stab of guilt, a reminder of the secret he carried. He felt like an unwitting accomplice, holding a piece of knowledge that could potentially save lives, yet unable to share it. He considered going to his bishop, seeking counsel, but even that felt like a betrayal of the confessional, a breach of a sacred trust that had been passed down through generations of priests. He was trapped, a silent witness to a horror he could not prevent, a silent scream building within him. In his desperation, he sought out Father Gregory, a retired priest who lived in a small, quiet residence attached to the church. Father Gregory, with his silver hair, gentle demeanor, and wise, knowing eyes, had been a mentor to Michael for years, a source of spiritual guidance and quiet wisdom. He listened patiently as Michael, without revealing the source or specific details of the confession, spoke in general terms about the profound sanctity of confidentiality versus the urgent demands of earthly justice. "My son," Father Gregory said, his voice raspy with age, yet clear and resonant, "the confessional is a sacred trust. It is the bridge to God's mercy, the very pathway to forgiveness and redemption. To break that trust is to shatter the very foundation of repentance, to close the door to souls seeking solace." He paused, his gaze distant, as if contemplating ancient truths. "It is a vow made not just to man, but to God himself. But what if that trust allows evil to continue unchecked?" Father Michael countered, his voice raw with anguish, the words tearing at his throat. "What if it means more innocent lives are taken, more suffering inflicted upon the world? How can I stand by and do nothing?" Father Gregory closed his eyes, a deep sigh escaping him, a sound of profound understanding and shared burden. "That is the cross we bear, Michael. We are shepherds, not judges. We offer solace, not verdicts. We guide souls to God. We do not condemn them to the earthly authorities. Yet, the law of God also demands justice, demands protection for the innocent. It is a terrible paradox, a crucible for the soul of a priest." He opened his eyes, his gaze piercing, meeting Michael's with an intensity that spoke volumes. "You must pray for guidance, Michael, and you must look for ways, within the bounds of your vows, to help. Perhaps there are things you can do without revealing the source of your knowledge, without betraying the sacred trust." Mallory and his team worked tirelessly, their hours stretching into endless nights, but the leads were cold, the trail elusive. Sarah Jenkins had no known enemies, no obvious connections to the criminal underworld, no apparent reason for such a brutal end. It was as if she had been chosen at random, a terrifying thought for the city's residents, a chilling reminder of their own vulnerability. The lack of a clear motive or connection made the investigation feel like grasping at smoke. Then, a week later, another body was found. This time it was David Miller, a retired auto worker, discovered in his small, meticulously kept home in Hamtramck, a quiet, residential neighborhood. The method of killing was eerily similar to Sarah Jenkins, a chilling signature that left no doubt in the minds of the police and the public. Panic began to spread like wildfire through the city. A serial killer was loose in Detroit, a phantom predator stalking its streets. Father Michael felt a cold wave of despair wash over him, a crushing weight of failure. He had known, and he had done nothing. The confessor's words echoed louder now, a mocking taunt in the silence of his rectory. "And I'm going to kill again." The guilt was a physical pain, a constant throb behind his eyes. He began to scrutinize every news report, every police statement, every snippet of information, searching for any detail, any nuance, any thread that might connect to the anonymous voice, to the unseen killer. He listened to the descriptions of the crime scenes, the victims' backgrounds, the vague theories offered by police spokespersons, desperate for a clue. He felt a desperate, almost obsessive need to find a pattern, a thread he could pull without explicitly breaking his sacred oath, a way to guide the authorities without betraying his vow. One afternoon, Detective Mallory, looking more weary than usual, visited St. Jude's. He was investigating Sarah Jenkins's last known movements, and she had been seen attending a community art event near the church a few days before her death. Mallory's eyes, though heavy-lidded, were sharp, missing nothing, observing every subtle shift in Father Michael's demeanor. "Father," Mallory began, his voice surprisingly gentle for a man of his profession, a tone he reserved for sensitive inquiries. "We're just trying to piece together Sarah's last few days, her routine, anyone she might have encountered. Did you know her? Did she ever come to confession here?" Father Michael felt a knot tighten in his stomach, a cold dread coiling in his gut. He had anticipated this question. I knew her by sight, detective, a vibrant young woman full of life. She attended some of our community events, yes. As for confession, detective, you know I cannot speak about such matters. The confessional is inviolable, a sacred space. Mallory nodded slowly, his gaze unwavering, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. I understand, Father. I respect that. But these are difficult times. 2 lives taken. The city is on edge, gripped by fear. Any information, however small, however seemingly insignificant, could be crucial to stopping this individual. I wish I could help more, detective. Father Michael said, his voice heavy with a truth he could not share, a burden that was almost too much to bear. He noticed Mallory's eyes linger on the confessional booth, a flicker of suspicion, a subtle question in their depths. The detective was a man who sensed secrets, even if he could not uncover them, a man who trusted his instincts. As Mallory left, the church door closing softly behind him, Father Michael felt the walls closing in, the pressure intensifying. The detective suspected him of holding back, and he was right. The moral weight was crushing him, threatening to suffocate him. He had to find a way. The lives of others depended on it. The third killing occurred 2 weeks later, plunging Detroit into an even deeper abyss of fear and despair. This time the victim was a young teacher, Emily Chen, found in her apartment in Midtown, a bustling, vibrant district now shadowed by terror. The pattern was undeniable, chillingly consistent, seemingly random victims, brutally murdered, with a horrifying consistency in the method, a signature that spoke of a disturbed mind. The city was gripped by a palpable terror. People stayed indoors after dark. The once vibrant streets of Detroit grew eerily quiet after dusk, and neighbors eyed each other with suspicion, wondering who might be next, who among them harbored such darkness. Detective Mallory held another press conference, his frustration palpable, etched on his weary face. "We are pursuing every lead, leaving no stone unturned," he stated, his voice grim yet resolute. "We believe this killer is meticulous, cunning, and deeply disturbed. We urge the public to remain vigilant, to report anything suspicious, no matter how trivial it may seem." He looked directly into the cameras, a plea in his eyes for the community's help. Father Michael watched the broadcast from his rectory, his hands trembling, a cold knot of dread in his stomach. He felt a growing sense of desperate urgency. He had to act, and soon. He began to revisit the details of the confession, trying to remember every inflection, every word, every subtle hint, every nuance in the distorted voice. The voice had been masked, but there was something about its rhythm, its tone, a certain cold detachment that resonated with him. He closed his eyes, trying to conjure it, to find a key, a forgotten detail that might unlock the mystery. He started walking the streets of his parish with a renewed purpose, observing, listening, his senses heightened. He spoke to parishioners, offering comfort and spiritual guidance, but also subtly probing, asking about new faces in the neighborhood, unusual occurrences, anything that might seem out of place, a new car, a strange visitor, a person who kept to themselves. He felt like a detective in a cassock, a role he never imagined he would play, his spiritual duties now intertwined with an earthly investigation. One afternoon, while visiting a soup kitchen run by the church, he overheard a conversation between 2 long-time volunteers, their voices hushed, their expressions worried. They were discussing the recent murders, and one mentioned a man who had recently started volunteering, a quiet, intense individual named Arthur Vance. "Is a bit odd," one volunteer whispered, glancing over her shoulder. "Keeps to himself. Doesn't say much. But he works hard, never complains. He has those eyes," the other added, her voice low, "like he's seen too much, like there's a deep sadness or something darker behind them. And he always wears a hat, even indoors, like he's trying to hide his face." Father Michael felt a prickle of unease, a cold sensation spreading through him. He had seen Arthur Vance before, a fleeting glimpse in the church hall, a new face among the familiar ones. He was indeed a new arrival, and the description of his demeanor resonated eerily with the anonymous voice in the confessional, quiet, intense, distant, almost detached from the world around him. Could it be? He dismissed the thought, telling himself it was pure speculation, fueled by his desperate search for answers, a mind grasping at straws. Yet the seed was planted, a tiny, persistent doubt that began to grow. He began to observe Arthur Vance more closely, subtly from a distance, during Mass, at community events, at the soup kitchen. Vance was indeed quiet, almost unnervingly so, a shadow moving through the bustling church. He moved with a deliberate, almost graceful precision, his movements economical. He avoided eye contact, his gaze always fixed on some distant point or on the ground, and yes, he often wore a wide-brimmed hat, even inside the church, casting his face in perpetual shadow. One evening, Father Michael was walking through a quiet park near the church, lost in thought, the weight of his secret pressing down on him. The streetlights cast long, distorted shadows that danced with the swaying branches of the trees. He felt a sudden, inexplicable chill, a prickling sensation on the back of his neck, a profound sense of being watched. He quickened his pace, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He glanced over his shoulder, but saw nothing, only the empty park and the deepening twilight. He dismissed it as paranoia, a natural consequence of the immense pressure and fear he was under, a mind playing tricks on him. But as he reached the rectory door, his hand on the cold brass knob, he noticed a faint scuff mark on the old stone step, a distinctive pattern etched into the weathered surface. He knelt, examining it closely in the dim light. It looked like the sole of a specialized boot, perhaps a work boot, with a unique tread. He remembered a detail from a police report about the Sarah Jenkins crime scene, a detail he had dismissed at the time. A similar, unusual boot print found near the abandoned warehouse. He had paid it no mind then, but now a cold dread settled over him, a terrifying realization. Had the killer been following him? Had he been watched, even in the sanctity of his own home? The next day, Father Michael felt compelled to visit Detective Mallory again. The urgency was undeniable. He knew he could not reveal the confession, but perhaps he could offer a different kind of insight, a subtle nudge in the right direction, without explicitly breaking his sacred oath. "Detective," Father Michael began, his voice calm, though his insides churned with a mixture of fear and determination. "I have been thinking deeply about the nature of these crimes. They seem almost ritualistic, almost personal. Not random acts of rage, not opportunistic violence, but something more deliberate, more calculated. Perhaps the killer believes they are fulfilling some twisted purpose, righting a perceived wrong." Mallory leaned forward, his eyes narrowed, a flicker of interest in their depths. "What makes you say that, Father? Have you seen something? Heard something that you can share?" His tone was probing, yet respectful. "Only in prayer, Detective." Father Michael replied, a half-truth that felt like a lie, yet allowed him to speak. A deep sense of a disturbed soul, driven by a perverse sense of justice, a distorted moral compass. He paused, then took a calculated leap of faith, choosing his words with extreme care. "Have you considered the possibility that the killer might be someone who believes they are righting a wrong? Someone who feels profoundly wronged by society or by specific individuals and is now seeking a twisted form of retribution?" Mallory studied him, his gaze intense, trying to read the unspoken words in the priest's eyes. "We consider all angles, Father. But as I've said, we have no clear motive, no obvious connection between the victims. They are from different walks of life, different neighborhoods. Perhaps the connection is not obvious, not immediately apparent." Father Michael suggested, remembering the confessor's chilling words. "Not for them. Perhaps it is something from the distant past, a hidden grievance, a long-simmering resentment that has finally boiled over." He then cautiously added, pushing the boundaries of his vow, Have you looked into anyone new in the community, anyone who might have recently arrived or changed their routine? Someone who keeps to themselves, who seems to carry a heavy burden." Mallory raised an eyebrow, a subtle shift in his expression. "That's a pretty broad description, Father. But we are interviewing new residents, yes, and following up on anyone who seems to fit a certain profile." He paused, a flicker of something in his eyes, a dawning realization, a growing respect for the priest's intuition. "You seem to have a strong intuition about this, Father. Stronger than most, almost as if you have a direct line to the killer's mind." Father Michael simply nodded, his gaze meeting Mallory's, holding the detective's stare. The unspoken understanding hung in the air between them, a fragile bridge built on shared purpose. Mallory knew he was holding back, but he could not prove it, and for now, the information was more valuable than the source. Father Michael's subtle inquiries and observations continued, his focus now almost entirely on Arthur Vance. He found himself drawn to the quiet volunteer, unable to shake the persistent, unsettling feeling that the man held a dark, terrible secret. He learned that Vance had only recently moved to Detroit, arriving from a small, unassuming town upstate, a place where his past could easily remain hidden. He had no immediate family in the city, no close friends, his life a blank slate, a mystery waiting to be uncovered. One afternoon, while helping organize old church records in the dusty, forgotten basement, a task usually reserved for the most tedious hours, Father Michael stumbled upon a box of archived parish newsletters from 15 years ago. The paper was yellowed with age, the ink faded, but as he flipped through them, a small article, tucked away on an inside page, caught his eye, a brief, somber notice about a tragic accident. A young boy, 10-year-old Thomas Vance, had been killed in a hit-and-run accident. His parents, described as pillars of their small community, had been devastated, their lives shattered. The driver, a prominent local businessman named Richard Thorne, had fled the scene and was never caught, the case eventually going cold, a painful, unresolved wound. The article mentioned, almost as an aside, that Thomas's older brother, Arthur, then a teenager, had been present and witnessed the entire horrific event. A cold wave washed over Father Michael, a sickening realization that sent a tremor through his entire body. Arthur Vance, the name, the age, the profound trauma. Could this be it? Could this be the hidden grievance, the twisted motive that had festered for years, finally erupting in a spree of violence? The confessor's chilling words, "not for them," suddenly took on a horrifying new meaning, a revelation that connected the seemingly disparate victims into a single, vengeful narrative. The victims, Sarah Jenkins, the artist, had recently painted a vibrant mural near the very intersection where Thomas Vance had been struck down. David Miller, the retired auto worker, it turned out had been a minor witness in a separate, minor traffic incident involving Richard Thorne years ago, though his testimony had been dismissed as unreliable. Emily Chen, the young teacher, had taught at the same prestigious private school that Richard Thorne's children attended, a school funded in part by Thorne's considerable wealth. It was a stretch, a series of tenuous connections, but a terrifying pattern was emerging, a vengeful thread connecting seemingly disparate lives to a single, unpunished act from the past, a ghost reaching from the grave. The businessman Richard Thorne was still a powerful figure in Detroit, his empire built on shrewd deals and ruthless ambition, though his reputation had always been shadowed by whispers of his past recklessness, a casual disregard for consequences. He had never been charged for Thomas Vance's death, the case eventually going cold, buried under layers of time and influence. Father Michael felt a sickening certainty, a chilling clarity that pierced through his moral dilemma. The anonymous confessor was Arthur Vance. The killer was seeking a twisted form of retribution, targeting those he perceived as connected, however tangentially, to the man who had escaped justice for his brother's death. It was a dark, vengeful justice, born of profound grief and unaddressed trauma. He had to confront Arthur, not as a priest in the confessional, bound by sacred vows, but as a man seeking to prevent further bloodshed, to stop the cycle of violence. He found Arthur in the church garden, meticulously pruning roses, his back to Father Michael, his movements precise and deliberate. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows, making the scene feel strangely theatrical. "Arthur," Father Michael said, his voice calm, yet firm, resonating with a quiet authority that demanded attention. Arthur Vance slowly turned, his movements unhurried, almost deliberate. His eyes, usually downcast, met Father Michael's, and for a fleeting moment there was a flicker of something in them, a deep, unsettling emptiness, a vast, desolate landscape of pain. "Father Michael," Arthur replied, his voice flat, devoid of any warmth or inflection, the same chilling flatness Father Michael remembered from the confessional, a voice that had haunted his nights. "We need to talk, Arthur," Father Michael stated, stepping closer, closing the distance between them. "About your brother, Thomas." Arthur's face remained impassive, a mask of control, but a subtle tension entered his shoulders, a slight clenching of his jaw. "What about him, Father? He's gone?" "Long gone. The accident, Arthur." Father Michael pressed, his gaze unwavering, trying to pierce through the man's carefully constructed facade. "The man who killed him, Richard Thorne." Arthur's eyes narrowed, a cold fire igniting within them, a spark of the rage that had been simmering for years. "What do you know about that, Father? What business is it of yours?" His voice was still flat, but a dangerous edge had crept into it. "I know you witnessed it, Arthur," Father Michael said, his voice softening, attempting to reach the lost boy beneath the hardened man, to find a flicker of humanity. "I know the pain you've carried, the injustice that has festered within you for all these years." Arthur's lips curled into a faint, bitter smile, a grimace that held no joy. "Injustice. Yes, Father. A word you priests know well, a concept you preach about but do little to truly address. He walked free. He built an empire on his lies, while my brother was left in the street like a discarded toy, a broken thing, forgotten by everyone but me." His voice was low, but the intensity behind it was terrifying. "And now you seek your own justice," Father Michael said, his heart aching for the tormented soul before him. "But this is not justice, Arthur. This is vengeance. It is a cycle of violence that consumes everything in its path, that leaves only desolation in its wake. It will not bring Thomas back. It will only destroy you and everyone you touch." "They were all connected, Father," Arthur said, his voice rising slightly, a hint of the madness that fueled him, a desperate attempt to justify his actions. "Sarah, her mural was a monument to his charity, a lie, a whitewash of his sins. David, he saw Thorne drive away that day. He could have spoken up, but he kept silent, complicit in the cover-up. Emily, she taught his children, taught them to be just like him, to inherit his tainted legacy. They all benefited from his tainted life, from his freedom, from his unpunished crime. They all deserved to pay, to feel a fraction of the pain he inflicted." "No, Arthur," Father Michael countered, his voice firm, resolute, cutting through the man's twisted logic. "No one deserves to die for the sins of another. You are creating more pain, more suffering, more injustice. You are becoming the very thing you despise, the very evil you claim to fight." Arthur took a step back, his eyes darting around, as if seeking an escape, a way out of the uncomfortable truth Father Michael was laying bare. "You do not understand, Father. You could never understand. The world is broken. It is corrupt. I am simply fixing it, one piece at a time." His voice had a detached, almost clinical quality now, as if he were discussing a broken machine. "You are breaking it further," Father Michael insisted, his voice unwavering, trying one last time to reach him. "And you must stop now, before it is too late, before you are consumed entirely." Arthur's face hardened, the brief flicker of vulnerability gone, replaced by a cold, impenetrable resolve. "It is already too late, Father. For all of us." He turned abruptly, a swift, fluid movement, and before Father Michael could react, He was gone, disappearing into the deepening shadows of the garden, leaving Father Michael alone with the chilling knowledge of what had to be done. Father Michael knew he could no longer remain silent. The sanctity of the confessional was paramount, a sacred vow he had upheld for decades, but the immediate threat to human life, the ongoing terror gripping the city, transcended even that sacred vow. He had to tell Mallory. He had to find a way to do it without explicitly breaking his oath, but he had to act. The lives of the innocent depended on it. Father Michael immediately called Detective Mallory, his hand trembling slightly as he dialed the familiar number. His voice, though controlled, carried an urgency that Mallory, a man accustomed to crisis, recognized instantly. There was a raw, desperate edge to the priest's tone that cut through the usual polite formality. "Detective," Father Michael said, his voice low but clear, "I believe I have information that could be critical to your investigation. It is not from a confession, but from my own observations, my own research, and a deep, unsettling intuition." He chose his words with meticulous care, walking the fine line between his sacred vows and his moral imperative. Mallory's voice was sharp, immediately on alert. "What is it, Father? What have you found?" "The killer," Father Michael began, choosing his words carefully, deliberately. "I believe he is targeting individuals connected, however indirectly, to a past injustice. Specifically, the hit and run death of a young boy named Thomas Vance 15 years ago. The driver was Richard Thorne." He paused, allowing the weight of the revelation to sink in. Mallory was silent for a moment, the sound of his own breathing audible through the phone. Then a low whistle escaped his lips, a sound of grim recognition. "Thomas Vance. That case went cold years ago. A real tragedy. Are you saying the killer is related to the victim? Is this a revenge killing?" "I believe the killer is Arthur Vance, Thomas's older brother," Father Michael stated, his voice steady now, the decision made, the burden of silence finally lifted, even if only partially. "He believes those victims were complicit in some way or beneficiaries of Thorne's unpunished crime, that they were part of a system that allowed injustice to prevail." He then described his observations of Arthur Vance, his quiet demeanor, his recent arrival in Detroit, the distinctive boot print he had noticed, and the specific, chilling details he had uncovered about the victim's tangential connections to Richard Thorne. He spoke of Arthur's deep, seated resentment, his belief that the world was broken and he was fixing it. Mallory listened intently, asking probing questions, his mind rapidly connecting the dots, piecing together the fragmented clues. He recognized the profound significance of what Father Michael was telling him. It was a motive, a pattern, a name, a clear path forward. "Father," Mallory said, his voice serious, a note of respect in it, "this is a huge lead. Potentially the break we've been praying for. But we need more. We need to find him, and quickly." "He was just here, in the church garden," Father Michael said, his voice filled with urgency. "He knows I know. He might be planning something desperate, something final, before he disappears." Mallory immediately dispatched units to the church, securing the area, and began a rapid, intense investigation into Arthur Vance's background, confirming every detail Father Michael had provided. They discovered Vance had a history of minor disturbances, a quiet anger that had simmered for years, a life lived on the fringes. His recent move to Detroit coincided precisely with Richard Thorne's latest public charity initiative, a new foundation bearing his name, a symbol of his apparent redemption. The timing was chillingly precise, a clear trigger for Arthur's vengeful spree. Mallory and his team moved swiftly. With a precision born of years of experience, they tracked Arthur Vance to a small, rented room in a rundown boarding house on the city's east side, a place as desolate as his soul. As they approached the building, they saw him silhouetted against the grimy window, packing a small, worn bag. He was preparing to flee, his mission in his twisted mind complete. A tense standoff ensued. Mallory, with a tactical team of officers, surrounded the dilapidated building, their weapons raised. their faces grim. They called out to Arthur through a bullhorn, their voices echoing in the quiet street, urging him to surrender peacefully, to lay down his arms. Inside, Arthur Vance moved with a desperate calm, a chilling serenity. He knew his time was up. He had completed his mission, or so he believed. He had avenged his brother in his own twisted, brutal way. He had brought a form of justice to those he felt had escaped it. He had a small, framed photograph in his hand, a faded image of a smiling young boy, Thomas, his innocent face a stark contrast to the darkness that now enveloped his brother. Mallory, his voice amplified by the bullhorn, tried to reason with him. "Arthur Vance, this is Detective Mallory. We know who you are. We know what you've done. It's over. There's nowhere left to run. Come out peacefully, and we can talk." Arthur did not respond. He simply continued to pack, his movements precise, almost methodical, as if preparing for a long journey. He raised the photograph to his lips, a silent, final farewell. Suddenly, a single, muffled shot rang out from inside the building, shattering the tense silence. The officers tensed, their weapons raised higher, their faces grim. Mallory yelled into the bullhorn, his voice raw with urgency, "Arthur, don't do this. There's still a chance for you. Don't throw it all away." Silence, a long, agonizing silence. Then, a single, heavy thud from within the room. The tactical team breached the door, moving with practiced efficiency. Inside, they found Arthur Vance. He had taken his own life, the small, faded photograph of his brother clutched tightly in his hand, pressed against his chest, a final, desperate embrace. The city breathed a collective sigh of relief. The killer was found. The terror was over. The news channels buzzed with the story, praising Detective Mallory and his team for their relentless pursuit of justice, for bringing an end to the nightmare. Father Michael watched the reports from his rectory, a profound sadness settling over him, a heavy weight in his soul. Justice had been served, but at a terrible, agonizing cost. Arthur Vance, a victim of an unpunished crime, had become a perpetrator, consumed by his own pain and rage, his life ending in a final, tragic act of despair. Richard Thorne, the prominent businessman, was questioned extensively by Mallory and his team. Though he vehemently denied any knowledge of Arthur Vance's motives or the direct connection to his brother's death, the renewed scrutiny of the cold case, fueled by the public outcry and the chilling revelations, forced the police to officially reopen the investigation into Thomas Vance's death. New evidence, overlooked or dismissed years ago, perhaps intentionally, began to surface. Witnesses who had been silent for years now came forward. The truth, however painful, however long delayed, was finally coming to light, shining a harsh glare on Thorne's past. Father Michael resumed his duties at St. Jude's, but he was changed. The experience had tested his faith, his sacred vows, and his very understanding of right and wrong, of good and evil. He had walked a fine line between sacred trust and moral imperative, between silence and intervention, and he knew deep in his heart that he had made the right choice, even if it had been agonizing. He carried the weight of the secret and the burden of Arthur Vance's tragic end, but he also carried the quiet conviction that he had saved lives.